Hello, and how are you doing? Today I'll show you how to make a chapati using whole wheat atamak. This is wheat with husk, which is very healthy, and this is what we used to cook a long time ago in the early 70s, right in the colonial village where my father was working, and we were brought up there in our early years before we bought our land and moved away. And the white man, my father's employer, would give workers, the villagers, wheat flour on occasions like Christmas, New Year, and our Uhuru or Freedom Day. We looked forward to it. The process of making this chapati is the same as making the white chapati. However, in this one, you have to begin. You have to use cold water. Don't use warm water because it will cook. Remember, it does not have gluten. So you put the flour in a wide container or basin or a sufuria, what we call a pot. We call it sufuria. And you air it, move it around to air it with a spoon or a spade. And then you add some sugar. In this case, I added sugar because remember, this wheat with husk is sweet. So I wanted to enhance that sweetness. I don't like it when I put salt because I don't like that contrast. And then I added cold water and I started kneading, as you can see, and it was hard because it does not have gluten. It doesn't really come together, and it was hard. And I was wondering, because I used to make chapati in our home, I was the designated chapati girl. When I was young, I was wondering how did I used to ace it. And you can see the process, how I'm doing it. Actually, it reminded me how we made the mud walls of our home when we moved from the Settler farm, whereby we had a glass thatched at the mudden walls. We could make clay using our black cotton soil and put water. I remember we had the Harambee spirit. Harambee spirit is where you come together and work together. So each villager could call people during the day of their building the house, like putting the wall. The men could do the structure, the women would put the mud. And I used to accompany my mother. And when you are building ours, I participated. You knead the clay with your legs, and then you do it the way you had seen and fix it in the structure. After some time, it was okay. I added a little oil to try and bring it together. And I made quite very soft dough. I think a long time I used to make very hard dough. Even my mother was making very hard dough. But I was trying to see whether it can be easier using soft dough, just like I do with the pure white flour, the one which doesn't have husk. It was even very hard to divide it into balls and portions for each chapati, as you can see. It was not even clear to demarcate which is which. And then I used a lot of flour, and I was using brown flour to roll them, because what happens is very hard to make this atamak or brown chapati, and many people mix the pure white flour with this, which is not good because sometimes there's no disclosure, and you might have a problem. Let's say you're diabetic and you only take the brown flour. So even the kneading, I used this atamak. I could put it on the surface, the wooden surface, chopping board, which I was using to knead, and it was sticking. I had to really be careful so that I was able to make the balls. They were sticking on the board, and I could rub myself some flour on the finger. If you use white flour, the best way to remove is to rub flour when your fingers are wet and you rub it with the other hand. Actually, I made 5 in number with using like half a kilo of the atamak. And then I used the same process I used to make. I wanted the layers, but I don't know whether we would call them layers. Remember, a long time ago, we never used to put layers in chapati because remember our history of chapati. It came from India, and they do not do layers. They just roll, put oil, and it will be flat. But I wanted to use the same concept as the white chapati to try and put some layers and give it a nice vibe. So I rolled using my pin. You see how sticky it was, because remember, it does not have any gluing substance. is whole wheat. It was sticking on my rolling pin. But as I said, that work I did as a young child with my mother, trying to put mud in our hearts as walls with other women, helped me. Then I applied the oil and spread some flour so that it doesn't stick together, and rolled into like a cinnamon roll. It is not coming out very well here as it would in the white flour. That was difficult, but I was happy to see it taking some shape, because initially I was a bit worried, and as I said, I wondered, as a young girl, this is the flour I used to work with. My mother worked with it. How come it has become very hard to work with it? At some point, I wondered, is this really the pure wheat flour, or has something changed in the flour of nowadays? I repeated the whole process. Rolling. If you have seen my white chapati, you see this process of making the layers. I was using liquid oil, and then I'll flip a little bit of the same brown flour to roll, and it was still sticking. I had to use my hand. Yeah, and cooking and making food is really an art. You have to improvise and see how what works for the end product you are looking out for. And I was storing them in a covered place, a pot, because it's good to cover them so that they don't dry out. I continued kneading, and I made 5 chapatis, and it took a much longer time than I would making double. It is quite easy to make the white chapatis, and maybe perhaps that's why many people opt to make the white chapatis. And also the taste, if you're not used to this kind of taste, well, you need to accustom. And I was getting better actually towards the end. It was not as hard. I made my cinnamon rolls. You can see the way they were. I had an idea of what I was looking for. It didn't have to be perfect. So long as you know what are you looking out for, what is the end product that you are seeking. And I load them. And then I started burning. The burning process comes after that. And you use the same method. You just put on a pan, and don't put oil before putting the chapati. Otherwise it will not cook well, and wait for it to cook on the side which is lying down. And I do it concurrently. As I roll the other chapatis, the next chapati which I'll be cooking, and maybe perhaps I was also cooking the stew. I multitask. The other chapati was taking time, and as I said, it was becoming better. You can see it was almost now like the white chapati. Yeah, I think the dough had rested a bit, and I think it would have been better had I waited for the dough to rest for a bit of time, because the chapatis which came later were easier and much better looking in shape. Let's go back to the other chapati on the fire. Once the other side has cooked, you see the bubbles, you flip it and see whether it has acquired a good color underneath. Use a spoon, and I peel it around to ensure that even the edges, you can see, I put it a bit on the side, the edges are cooked, and it had some marks. They are not very visible, given that the flour is also brown, but it was good enough. And after both sides have cooked is when you apply the oil. And can you see, I'm using a feather, a chicken feather, to apply the oil, because I wanted to remember the olden days, because when I was a young girl, and not just me, many families, my mother would apportion the oil for me to use. I would make many chapatis, like 12 or 13. We are many, we are 7. And used to make it like once or twice a year. And then they apportion a little oil, the way you can see I put mine there. You'd have to use that. And to make sure that I did not overput the oil, I used a feather. We used to use feathers from the chicken. I think this is equivalent to the current blushes people use, the smearing blushes. But the feather worked quite fine. I had gotten it from the village, cleaned it very well with the vinegar, and it dried well, so it was safe. And as you can see, it's actually a very good blush because it's thick, and very flexible. This took me back to the early 1970s, 75, 76, because this is how we used to do it, not with a spoon, because maybe you scoop a lot of oil and the oil will not be enough.